It wasn't the glimmer of gold or the shine of silver. It wasn't the ink drying on another multi-million-dollar contract. It was the girl. She was asleep in a chicken coop, curled up in the filthy straw, clutching a few eggs to her chest as if they were treasure. Her dress was old and torn, her hair a matted mess covering half her face. That's what made Arthur Harrison, a man whose heart was colder than a bank vault, stop dead in his tracks. He had no way of knowing that this single, shocking discovery was about to change his life forever. The sound of Arthur's expensive shoes crunched on the dry Texas dirt. At 45, his sharp features and cold eyes were used to analyzing numbers, not human misery. He was wearing a freshly pressed navy suit, completely out of place on this dusty poultry farm. To the people of San Miguel, he was a ghost, a wealthy recluse who owned half the county but was rarely seen. He lived alone in the massive ranch house on the hill, avoiding local events, buried in his work. Few knew that Arthur had once been a happy man, but a tragic car accident on a rainy night had taken his wife and daughter, leaving Arthur an empty shell. He'd built an icy wall around his heart, and his ranch became a fortress of solitude. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. It wasn't the glimmer of gold or the shine of silver. It wasn't the ink drying on another multi-million-dollar contract. It was the girl. She was asleep in a chicken coop, curled up in the filthy straw, clutching a few eggs to her chest as if they were treasure. Her dress was old and torn, her hair a matted mess covering half her face. That's what made Arthur Harrison, a man whose heart was colder than a bank vault, stop dead in his tracks. He had no way of knowing that this single, shocking discovery was about to change his life forever. The sound of Arthur's expensive shoes crunched on the dry Texas dirt. At 45, his sharp features and cold eyes were used to analyzing numbers, not human misery. He was wearing a freshly pressed navy suit, completely out of place on this dusty poultry farm. To the people of San Miguel, he was a ghost, a wealthy recluse who owned half the county but was rarely seen. He lived alone in the massive ranch house on the hill, avoiding local events, buried in his work. Few knew that Arthur had once been a happy man, but a tragic car accident on a rainy night had taken his wife and daughter, leaving Arthur an empty shell. He'd built an icy wall around his heart, and his ranch became a fortress of solitude. Girish Gelishme Bashlangaja today. However, Arthur was at the poultry farm. Greg Pullman, the longtime administrator, met him with a folder and his usual smile. "Here's the quarterly report, Mr. Harrison. Production is up. Expenses are down." Arthur scanned the figures. His hand paused. "Are you sure these numbers are right?" His voice was quiet but carried an edge. "Yes, sir." "Checked them myself," Greg replied, a little too quickly. Arthur remained silent, signed the delivery papers, but didn't look satisfied. "Take me to the Coops. I want to see for myself," Greg flinched. A man in a $5,000 suit wanted to walk through a chicken coop? Yes, sir." "Right this way, please." The smell hit Arthur first, a pungent, eye-watering ammonia that clung to the air. Greg pushed open a warped wooden door. Inside, the air was thick. Chickens squawked and scattered. Arthur's eyes scanned the room, and then he froze. In the corner, on a pile of filthy straw, a little girl was curled up. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Her body was small and fragile, and she was clutching several eggs to her chest. Her dress was torn, her hair matted with dirt. Arthur couldn't believe his eyes. A child sleeping in a chicken coop. He moved slowly. The crunch of his shoe on the dry dirt made the girl's eyes snap open. They were wide, dark, and filled with a raw animal panic. She scrambled backward, her back hitting the wooden wall. "Hello," Arthur said, consciously trying to soften his voice. "What are you doing here, little one?" The girl trembled, her chapped lips moving, but no sound came out. After a long pause, a weak but resolute whisper escaped. "Don't take them. They're mine." It wasn't the whine of a spoiled child. It was a desperate plea, as if those fragile eggs were the only thing keeping her alive. At that moment, Arthur felt a sharp pain in his chest. Before he could ask more, Greg Pullman laughed nervously from the doorway. Mr. Harrison, that's just Lily. She's Frank Morales' daughter, from the tenant farm on the other side of the property. The girl wonders. Pay her no mind, sir. Arthur turned on Greg, his eyes as hard as steel. You call this wandering? Sleeping in filth? Greg's smile vanished. Arthur turned back to the girl, whose terrified eyes darted between the two men. What's your name? Arthur asked gently. The girl, Lily, just bit her lip and didn't answer. The moment Greg took another step forward, she bolted. She scrambled to her feet and shot out the door, her bare feet pounding the gravel. In seconds, her small figure had disappeared past an old wooden fence. Arthur stood motionless, the chaotic sound of the chickens filling the silence. He was left with a storm of questions. Why would a child be sleeping in a chicken coop? Why was she so terrified? He knew, deep in his gut, this was no simple childish game. That image haunted him all night. Back in his sterile, silent mansion, the girl's terrified eyes replayed in his mind. Don't take them. They're mine. He sat in his study until late, a glass of expensive whiskey untouched on his desk. At 11 p.m. he grabbed his coat. He wasn't used to going out at night, but the image of those scared eyes wouldn't leave him. He had to find out the truth about that girl's family. The next morning, his black sedan rolled slowly down the dirt track to the tenant housing. He found the Morales house. It was a simple, 2-story wooden farmhouse, but the warm yellow light from inside hid a cold reality. Inside, Frank Morales sat slumped at the kitchen table. He was 42, but he looked 60, his face haggard, his eyes tired. His new wife, Brenda, came out of the kitchen. She was dressed in a neat floral dress, her hair pinned up. She seemed orderly and kind, but her voice was sharp. Lily was cowering in a small wooden chair, her small hands clutching a piece of stale bread behind her back. Stealing food again, Lily? Brenda's words were like knives. Lily flinched, hiding her head. I was just hungry. A smile appeared on Brenda's lips, but it held no warmth. Only good children get to eat. Do you think you've been good? Lily trembled in silence. Her eyes darted to her father, pleading for help. But Frank just lowered his head, interlaced his fingers, and said nothing. His silence was heavier than any scolding. Just then, Arthur knocked on the wooden door. The sound froze the room. Instantly, Brenda's expression changed. A bright, welcoming smile plastered on her face as she rushed to open it. Mr. Harrison, what an honor. Please come in. Arthur stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the room. I was inspecting the property this morning. Since I was in the area, I thought I'd visit the Morales family. Lily, honey, come say hello to Mr. Harrison. Brenda cooed, her voice now dripping with sugar. She's a bit stubborn, but she's a sweet girl. Lily crept forward slowly, her eyes still red, her head bowed. Hello, sir. Arthur nodded, watching her closely. He noticed her small hand was still clenched behind her back, hiding the stale bread. Her eyes were cautious, like a bird trapped in a cage. He knelt. Is that all you've had to eat today, Lily? The room went silent. Lily froze, her hand trembling. She gave no answer. Frank's eyes were glued to the floor. Brenda immediately jumped in with a high-pitched laugh. Oh, Mr. Harrison, please don't worry. You know how kids are. She's just being dramatic. Always playing these little games. Arthur didn't respond. He just looked at Lily for a long moment. In her eyes, he saw the same fear he had seen in the chicken coop. He looked at Frank, who remained silent as a stone. After a few minutes, Arthur stood up, politely refusing an offer for dinner. As he stepped onto the porch, his eyes met Lily's one last time. She was still holding the bread, her gaze filled with fear and a desperate, silent plea for help. The moment the door closed, Brenda's smile vanished. She turned to Lily, her eyes sharp. Outside, now, and you'll get no dinner tonight for this. Lily stood up silently and walked out onto the porch. The wind picked up, whipping her thin dress around her small, trembling body. In his car, Arthur gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The trembling voice from the coop echoed in his mind. It's mine. He took a deep breath. Something was terribly wrong in that house, and he knew he could not ignore it. The next day, Arthur called Greg Pullman. His voice was firm. If you see that girl anywhere near the coops again, anywhere on this ranch, you call me, immediately. Do not ignore it. Greg? who had never heard his boss take an interest in a tenant's personal life, was startled. "Yes, sir, absolutely. 3 days past." On a gray afternoon, the phone in Arthur's study rang. It was Greg, his voice panicked. "Mr. Harrison, the girl, she's in the coop again. She doesn't look good. I think you should come." Arthur was in his car in 30 seconds. He found her collapsed in the straw, her breathing shallow, her small hands trembling as she tried to gather a few eggs. Before he could even speak her name, her small body listed to one side, and she fainted, the eggs rolling from her grasp and cracking on the dirt floor. "Lily." Arthur froze, then ran to her side. He knelt, lifting her head. Her face was pale, her lips cracked and dry. Her breathing was so faint he had to lean in close to hear it. In a panic, he scooped her up into his arms. "My God, she's just skin and bones," he muttered, his voice breaking. His expensive suit was instantly stained with mud and filth. He didn't care. He lifted Lily and ran from the coop. Greg ran toward him, alarmed. "Mr. Harrison, should I call an ambulance?" "No time," Arthur yelled, already opening the car door. He laid Lily gently in the back seat, got in, and slammed the accelerator, speeding toward San Miguel General Hospital. He burst into the small county hospital carrying Lily's frail body. "I need a doctor. It's an emergency." A nurse, stunned to see the reclusive millionaire covered in dirt and carrying an unconscious child, grabbed a gurney. A moment later, a woman in a white coat approached, her eyes sharp and decisive. "I'm Dr. Ramirez, the pediatrician on call. I'll take her." Arthur nodded, stepping back, his eyes never leaving the door she was taken through. Dr. Ramirez emerged a few minutes later, her expression grim. "This is severe malnutrition," she said flatly. "It's not from 1 or 2 missed meals. This is long-term systemic starvation. This girl's body is exhausted." Before Arthur could process this, the ER doors burst open. Brenda Collins rushed in, her dress still smelling strongly of perfume. "Lily, oh my baby, what happened? It breaks my heart. She just refuses to eat." Arthur spun around, his eyes darkening. He could see the lie dripping from every word. Brenda clutched her chest, tears streaming down her face, but her words were rushed, aimed at Dr. Ramirez. "Doctor, I've tried everything. She's just so stubborn. She rejects all food. I'm at my wit's end." Dr. Ramirez looked at her coldly. "Ma'am, this doesn't look like a stubborn child. This looks like neglect. This child's weight is below a safe threshold. We'll have to admit her for treatment." Just then, a figure appeared in the doorway. Frank Morales entered, his face pale, his eyes darting around. He saw his daughter lying on the bed, and his whole body trembled. "Lily," he whispered. Lily's eyes flickered open, but when she saw her father, she cringed and tried to pull away, her eyes wide with fear. That single moment cut Arthur to the core. He stepped toward Frank, his voice like ice. "Look at her, Morales. She's afraid of you. She's afraid of her own father. I didn't know," Frank stammered, paralyzed. "I didn't think." "Not knowing doesn't make you innocent," Arthur shot back. "Your silence has been killing this child." Frank dropped his head, unable to meet his daughter's eyes, unable to find a single word of defense. Brenda immediately jumped between them, her voice shrill but trying to sound sweet. "Mr. Harrison, you're mistaken. We love this child. She's just difficult. She doesn't obey." Dr. Ramirez held up a hand. "Basta, enough! I only trust medicine and facts, and the facts say this child is being neglected. If this continues, I am legally obligated to report this to Child Protective Services. This girl needs to be protected." The room fell silent. Brenda's face went white. Frank stood like a statue. Arthur looked at Lily, still trembling, tears running silently down her cheeks. He clenched his fist. He would not let this child return to that hell. Arthur left the hospital into the gloomy afternoon. He knew that if he remained a simple spectator, Lily would never escape Brenda's suffocating control. He pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Mendez. I need you in San Miguel." On the other end, a gravelly voice answered. Jack Mendez, a 55-year-old ex-federal marshal turned private investigator, was a man of few words. "Been a while, Harrison. What's the trouble?" "I need you to dig into a woman. Brenda Collins. I have reason to believe she's not the woman this town thinks she is." "I'll be there in 2 days," Mendez said, and hung up. 2 days later, Mendez sat in Arthur's study. He dropped a thick folder on the desk. You were right to be suspicious. Her name wasn't always Brenda Collins. It was Brenda Collins back in Ohio. 10 years ago, she was neck-deep in a financial fraud case. Never convicted. Key witness disappeared. But she was linked. After that, she vanished, changed her name, and reappeared here. I knew it, Arthur said. A person hiding their past can't live honestly in the present. Meanwhile, Brenda was playing her own game. She walked through the San Miguel farmers market, smiling sweetly, handing out homemade muffins to her neighbors. The girl is just so difficult, she said, her voice full of false compassion. I love her like my own, but she rejects me. Still, I have to be patient for Frank's sake. The neighbors nodded in approval. You're a model wife, Brenda, one said. Frank is a lucky man. The rumors began to form. Brenda was a sweet, kind woman. Lily was the problem child. Brenda then went to the local sheriff's office. She sat down with Sheriff Dominguez, a man who had known her for years, and burst into tears. I'm worried about my stepdaughter, she sobbed. That Arthur Harrison. He keeps lurking around our house, staring at Lily with this scary look. I'm afraid he's trying to lure her. Dominguez frowned. Brenda, that's a serious accusation. Mr. Harrison is a respected man. I know, she cried. But I have to protect Lily. Please, just investigate. If I'm wrong, I'll apologize publicly. The seed of doubt was planted. The rumors spread like wildfire. A rich, lonely recluse? An unhealthy interest in a poor tenant's daughter? It fit a perfect, ugly narrative. The next time Arthur went to the general store, the whispers followed him. People who used to nod respectfully now stared with contempt. One man spat on the ground as he passed. Freak, he muttered. Arthur felt the trap spring. Back at the ranch, Mendez was furious. You can sue her for slander, Arthur. We can destroy her in court. Arthur shook his head, staring out the window. My honor isn't the point. This isn't about my reputation. It's about getting that little girl to safety. A lawsuit will just be a distraction. Keep digging. At the hospital, Lily had overheard the nurses whispering about Arthur. When he visited that afternoon, she turned her face to the wall. Hello, Lily. How are you feeling? She whispered, her voice trembling. If I hadn't taken those eggs, they wouldn't hate you. Arthur froze. He sat down in the chair next to her bed. Lily, look at me. She slowly turned, her eyes swimming with tears. This is not your fault, he said, his voice firm and clear. You did what you had to do to survive. The only people at fault here are the adults who failed you. A single hot tear rolled down her cheek. For the first time, she felt someone actually believed her. That night, Frank Morales couldn't sleep. He went down to the dusty basement, to an old wooden trunk that had belonged to Maria, his first wife. He hadn't opened it since she died. He found the key hidden in his desk and opened the lock. The rusty click echoed in the silent house. Inside, beneath some old photos and a scarf, was a thick legal binder. He opened it. His eyes widened. The Maria Morales Trust. He read on, his hands shaking. Beneficiary, Liliana Morales. Value, $2.5 million. He collapsed onto a nearby stool, the air knocked out of him. It was all for Lily, to be given to her when she turned 18. His first wife had left her entire inheritance to their daughter. He thought of Brenda's constant, casual questions about his finances, about Maria's old papers. It all clicked into place in the most horrifying way. My God, he whispered, his voice hoarse. This is what she's after. This is why. Footsteps creaked on the stairs. What are you doing down here, Frank? Brenda stood at the bottom of the steps. Her friendly mask was gone, replaced by a cold, reptilian stare that chilled him to the bone. Frank stood up, clutching the binder. I know, Brenda. I know about Maria's trust. For Lily, this is why you married me. This is why you've been doing this to her. Brenda laughed, a dry, cold sound that echoed in the small basement. And what? You think finding some old papers makes you strong? You think you can stop me? This whole town thinks I'm a saint and you're a weak fool who can't control his own wife. Who do you think they'll believe? She walked right up to him, invading his space, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You cross me, Frank, and I promise you, you will lose everything." He trembled, but for the first time, a small, hot ember of resolve ignited in his chest. He had to choose. Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. Frank Morales stood paralyzed in the dark basement, Brenda's cold threat hanging in the dead air. "You will lose everything." His hands, slick with cold sweat, trembled as he clutched the $2.5 million trust document. He was a coward. He had lived as a coward for years, hiding behind his silence while his daughter wasted away. But the image of Lily cringing from him in the hospital, the sound of Arthur's icy accusation, "Your silence has been killing this child," broke something inside him. The fear of Brenda was immense, but the fear of living with himself if he did nothing was suddenly greater. He looked at the binder. This was the motive. This was the one piece of leverage the world didn't know about. That same night, ignoring the tremor in his hands, Frank Morales drove his battered pickup truck to the imposing iron gates of Arthur Harrison's ranch. He hadn't been invited. He didn't care. He buzzed the intercom, his voice shaking. Arthur met him at the door, his eyes cold and wary, blocking the entrance. "What do you want, Morales?" Frank couldn't meet his gaze. He just held out the legal binder. "She's Brenda. She's not who you think," Frank stammered, the words tumbling out. "It was never about me or even the house. It was this. It's Lily's inheritance from her mother, Maria. It's worth $2.5 million. Brenda wants it. That's why she's been hurting her. That's why she's been starving her." Arthur's expression didn't change, but a new, dangerous intensity burned in his eyes. He took the documents, his gaze scanning the first page. He stepped back. "Get inside." Jack Mendez was sitting in the study. For the next hour, Frank confessed everything. His weakness, his fear, his complicity through silence, and Brenda's cold, calculated cruelty. Mendez listened, his face impassive. When Frank finished, Mendez looked at Arthur. "We have a solid motive. And now?" he said, nodding at Frank. "We have an inside man, but it's not enough to win in court. Not in this town. Brenda has spent years building a reputation as a saint. Right now, it's her word against a grieving, unstable husband. We need a confession. Frank, can you get her to admit it on tape?" A plan was formed, cold and precise. Mendez produced a small, high-fidelity digital recorder. "You'll have to get her to talk about the money. About Lily. We need her words." Mendez, meanwhile, took the Ohio fraud reports and Frank's testimony directly to Sheriff Dominguez. The combination of out-of-state financial crimes and a father's desperate confession was finally enough to bypass Brenda's local sainthood. Dominguez was shaken. My God, she fooled us all. He agreed to provide backup, but only if they got the confession. "Without that tape," Dominguez warned, "my hands are tied. You'll be the man who tried to frame the town's sweetheart." The next night, Frank returned home. The air in the house was electric with tension. Brenda was in the living room, filing her nails, looking smug. "So, you came crawling back," she sneered. Frank took a deep breath, his hand brushing the recorder in his pocket. He had to play this right. "Brenda, I've been thinking. You're right. We can't let this money slip away." Brenda's eyes lit up, a predatory gleam. "I knew you'd see it my way. So what's the plan?" Frank sat down, his heart hammering. What if she doesn't make it? At the hospital. What happens to the trust then?" Brenda's smile widened. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Then it goes to you, her guardian. And what's yours is mine." She laughed, a dry, cold sound. "I did what I had to do. That spoiled brat was in my way. Starving her was easy. A little less food each day. Let her shiver in that chicken coop. Let her waste away. Once she was broken or gone, that trust fund would have been ours. She's weak, Frank, just like her mother. And just like you." "It's over, Brenda." Brenda spun around. The front door burst open. Arthur Harrison stood there, flanked by Sheriff Dominguez and 2 deputies. Jack Mendez stood slightly behind them, holding up the small digital recorder. Its red light blinking. "We heard every word," Mendez said, his voice flat. Brenda's face turned white, then a blotchy, furious purple. She lunged, not at the police, but at Frank, her nails bared like claws.
You set me up! I'll kill you!
A deputy tackled her before she could reach him. She was restrained, screaming and kicking. Lies, he trapped me.
You'll all pay for this.
This town loves me.
You'll see.
Put your hands behind your back, Mrs. Collins, Sheriff Dominguez said, his voice heavy with disgust. The cold click of handcuffs echoed through the small house. As she was dragged out, still screaming threats, Frank collapsed into a chair, his body shaking uncontrollably. He looked up and saw Arthur standing in the hallway. Lily was hiding behind Arthur's legs, having seen the whole thing from the stairwell. Her eyes were wide, watching the woman who had tortured her being taken away. Arthur placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Lily," Arthur said, his voice thick with an emotion Frank had never heard from him. "It's over. The darkness is gone." The trial rocked San Miguel to its core. The courtroom was packed. Brenda's friends and neighbors came at first to support her, whispering about how she must have been framed by the rich recluse. Then, the tape was played. A collective, horrified gasp filled the room as Brenda's cold, clear voice detailed the starvation plot. Dr. Ramirez followed with grim medical testimony. The fraud records from Ohio sealed the case. Brenda Collins was found guilty of aggravated child abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted endangerment. She was sentenced to the maximum term in state prison. In the ensuing custody battle, Frank Morales, facing his own charges of criminal neglect, lost guardianship of his daughter. Arthur Harrison was granted full legal guardianship of Lily. He took her back to his large, empty ranch, which, for the first time, began to feel like a home. He hired the best child therapist in the state, bought her new clothes, and patiently sat with her for hours as she navigated the long, slow, silent path of healing. Frank, humbled and broken, received 2 years of probation and mandatory counseling. He had lost his home, his wife, and his daughter. He was working at a gas station when Arthur found him. "I need a new groundskeeper for the ranch," Arthur said, his voice neutral. "The pay is fair, and it's on the property." It was not an act of forgiveness. It was a structured opportunity. Frank accepted. He lived in a small cottage on the far end of the property. He didn't ask to see Lily. He simply worked, showing up every day. He'd leave small, hand-carved wooden birds on the porch railing for her. For 2 months, they sat untouched. Then one day one was gone. Slowly, painfully, he was rebuilding what his silence had broken. Years passed. Arthur's icy exterior had melted, replaced by the warmth of a man who had found a purpose beyond balance sheets. He had learned patience. He had learned to be a father. On a bright spring day, a new building was dedicated on the edge of town. The Lily's Hope Center for Children, a state-of-the-art facility for at-risk youth, funded entirely by Arthur Harrison. Arthur stood at the podium, his hair now more silver than black. "I once saw a child sleeping in a chicken coop, starving for food," he said, his voice echoing. "But she was also starving for safety. This center is a promise that no child in this county will ever have to feel that afraid again." He looked to the front row. Lily, now a bright, confident 15-year-old, smiled back at him, her eyes shining. Sitting next to her, in a clean suit, was Frank Morales, the center's new, full-time property manager. Later that day, the three of them stood on the center's wide porch, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky. Lily leaned her head on Arthur's shoulder. "I'm so lucky," she whispered, reaching out her other hand to take Frank's. "I have 2 fathers." Arthur put his arm around her. Frank squeezed her hand, his eyes wet with tears he no longer hid. The darkness had been pulled out by the roots, and in its place, something new, strong, and real had been given the chance to grow.